Ever just zone out while you're brushing your teeth?
No.
Or find yourself halfway to work and you can't even remember like how you got there?
Happens to the best of us.
Yeah, that's the power of habit right there.
Yeah.
Taking over. And today we're going deep, deep, deep into those habits.
Unpacking everything, how they form, why they're so sticky, why they like to hang around, and most importantly, how we can actually change them.
How do we actually get them to budge? Exactly. And for this deep dive, we've got our trusty guide, Charles Duhigg, and his book, The Power of Habit.
Which is such a good book, by the way. It's amazing.
Oh, it's packed with insights. So consider this your cheat sheet, your shortcut to understanding the automatic processes running in the background of our lives every single day.
The stuff we don't even think about.
Exactly, like what's actually going on up there. So Duhigg kicks things off with this idea, this concept he calls the habit loop.
The loop.
The loop. Now, I know loop might sound maybe a bit technical, but I promise it's actually pretty simple. So picture this in your mind. It's a 3-step cycle, and your brain goes through this cycle every single time. Every single time you perform a habit.
It's like a little pattern, a little dance that your brain's doing.
Yes, like a little dance. Okay, so step 1.
Yeah.
We have the cue. Think of this as the trigger, that little signal that tells your brain, hey, it's go time, time for that automatic behavior. And it could be literally anything. I mean, it could be a certain time of day, a specific location, even like an emotion.
Right, like when you get that 3 p.m. slump and you're like, ooh, cookie. That slump, that's your cue.
Precisely. The 3 p.m. slump cue. All right, so that takes us to step 2, the routine. And this is the habit in action, the behavior itself. So in our little cookie scenario here, what's the routine? The routine is you grabbing that cookie and taking a bite.
Gotta get that cookie. And of course, no habit loop is complete without the third piece of the puzzle, the reward.
Ah, yes, the reward. And this is the good stuff. This is what tells your brain, yeah, that felt good, let's do it again. It's that satisfying feeling. So with our cookie example, the reward might be that sweet, sweet taste. Maybe it's a temporary energy boost.
And this is where it gets really, really interesting. This whole loop, the cue, the routine, the reward, it's often happening under the radar. We don't even realize it's happening.
It's like our brain is on autopilot.
It is. Our brain's being efficient. It's like, I've done this a million times. I don't need to think about it.
So it's like our brains are kind of hardwired for habits in a way.
Yeah, they kind of are. And to really illustrate just how deep these habit loops go, how ingrained they can be, Duhigg, he tells this fascinating story about a man named Eugene Pauly.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about Eugene.
So Eugene, unfortunately, he had really severe memory loss. He had a virus and it affected his memory. He could barely remember things that happened a few minutes ago.
Oh, wow. That's got to be so difficult to live with.
It's heartbreaking, to think about. But here's the thing. Despite this severe memory loss, Eugene was still able to learn new habits.
Really? Wait, how is that even possible? If he can't make new memories, how can he form new habits?
That's the amazing part. Eugene's case, it actually helped researchers discover that habits, they're not stored in the same part of the brain as our conscious memories.
So even though his memory was impaired, his brain could still pick up those automatic sequences? That's incredible.
It is. And there's this one example that really highlights this. So researchers, they took Eugene on walks around his neighborhood, and they'd point out landmarks along the way. But because of his memory problems, Eugene, he couldn't remember the route.
So he'd be lost.
You'd think so, right? But here's the thing. Even though he couldn't consciously recall the route, his body, it knew what to do. He would just start walking and he would automatically go through the motions, turning at the right corners, stopping at the usual spots, like his body was on autopilot.
Wow, that's a powerful example of just how strong these habit loops can be. They operate on a whole other level, it seems like, beyond our awareness.
They really do, and it highlights just how much of our lives is actually driven by these unconscious patterns.
So that's kind of both amazing and a little bit unnerving, right? Realizing how much our habits are running the show.
It can definitely be a little, whoa, wait a minute, who's in control here?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But don't worry, we're not just going to leave you feeling powerless over your own brains. Because luckily for us, Duhigg, he gives us some tools, some strategies to actually start changing these habits. And one of the biggest takeaways is what he calls the golden rule of habit change.
This is a big one. And it's actually a lot simpler than you might think. The golden rule. You ready for this? You can't just erase an old habit. You can't just delete it. You have to replace it with a new one. It's like, imagine a train, right?
Okay, I like where this is going. I'm picturing a train.
You can't just stop a train out of nowhere. It's got momentum, it's on a track, but you can change its destination. You can switch it to a different track. That's the golden rule in action.
So we're basically rerouting the train of our habits.
Exactly. Rerouting. I like that.
So we've got the rerouting image in mind. But what are the nuts and bolts of actually doing that? How do we switch those tracks when it comes to our own habits?
So remember that habit loop. The cue, routine, reward, that's where we get tactical. And Duhigg, he illustrates this brilliantly with a really unexpected example, Febreze.
Febreze.
Yeah.
Like the air freshener.
The one and only.
Okay, now I'm really curious. Because, I don't think I've ever really thought about the habit loop of air freshener before.
Right. Well, it's more interesting than you might think. So when Febreze first hit the shelves, it actually tanked. It was a total flop.
Seriously, but it's Febreze. Everyone loves Febreze.
I know, right? It seems so obvious now. But back then, the marketing team, they figured, okay, people, they use air freshener when they smell something bad, right? So they marketed it as a solution for bad smells.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Bad smell, you reach for the Febreze.
Seems logical, but there was a problem. Turns out we kind of get used to the smells in our own homes. We don't even really notice them after a while. So that cue, that bad smell, it wasn't really registering.
So even though it made sense on paper, the cue wasn't strong enough. It wasn't really triggering the habit.
Exactly. So the folks over at Procter & Gamble, they had to go back to the drawing board. They realized they needed a new strategy, a new cue.
So what did they do? How did they turn things around? Okay, I'm dying to know how they saved Febreze. But before we get to that, we got to talk about the willpower thing.
Yeah.
Because, sometimes it feels like you've got this great plan to create a new habit, but then your willpower just decides to take a nap.
Yeah, willpower, it can be a fickle friend. Right when you need it most, it's nope, not today.
Exactly. So how do we work with that? Because, we can't just, wish away our bad habits.
We wish. No, it takes a bit more than that. And this is where understanding the limits of willpower is so important. It's not this, magical force that we can summon up whenever we want.
So it's not like in the movies where someone just, grits their teeth and suddenly they have all the willpower in the world.
I know, right? Wouldn't that be nice? But in reality, willpower, it's more like a muscle. And just like any other muscle, it can get tired.
Okay, the willpower muscle. I've heard that before. Mm-hmm. But how does that actually play out in, real life?
All right, picture this. You go to the gym, right? And you try to lift weights nonstop for, hours on end. No breaks, no rest. What's going to happen?
Oh, I'd be totally wiped out. My muscles would be screaming.
Exactly. You'd burn out super quick. And willpower, it's the same way. If we spend our entire day resisting temptations, making difficult decisions, our willpower, it starts to get depleted. It gets fatigued.
And that's when we're more likely to give in to those cravings, make those impulsive choices we later regret.
Bingo. Your willpower muscle is just too tired to put up a fight.
Okay, so that makes sense. But what about that Febreze mystery? How'd they finally crack the code?
Oh, right. Febreze. So they realized they had to tap into a different cue, a different routine. And what they landed on was brilliant. Instead of positioning Febreze as a solution to a problem, they reframed it as a reward.
A reward. I'm not sure I'm following.
So instead of saying use Febreze to get rid of bad smells, they started marketing it as the finishing touch after you clean. That little burst of freshness that signals, my work here is done. They turned it into a reward for completing the cleaning routine.
So they hooked it onto an existing habit. That's so clever.
Right. They worked with the natural flow of people's routines instead of trying to fight against it. And it totally worked. Febreze became a massive success.
That's a perfect example of how understanding the science of habits, the cues, the routines, the rewards, it can be way more effective than just relying on sheer willpower.
Totally. And speaking of willpower, remember, it's limited. So don't try to change everything at once.
Yeah, that all-or-nothing mentality can really backfire.
Big time. It's like trying to climb Mount Everest on your first day of hiking. You're going to set yourself up for failure.
So what's the better approach? Baby steps.
Exactly. Start small. Focus on one or two key habits you want to change. And once those become more automatic, you can gradually add more.
Those keystone habits we talked about, the ones that have that ripple effect.
Yep. Like maybe you start by making your bed every morning. It seems simple, but that one small action can actually create a sense of order and control that spills over into other areas of your life. You start feeling more motivated, more productive.
It's like setting the tone for the whole day.
Exactly. And the key is, it doesn't have to be this huge, monumental effort. Small steps, repeated consistently over time. That's what creates lasting change.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of habits, it seems like the biggest takeaway is that we're not at the mercy of our brains. We have the power to understand these patterns, these automatic processes, and we can use that knowledge to create positive change in our lives.
Absolutely. We've got the tools. Now it's just a matter of putting them into action, one small step at a time.
Love that. Small steps, big changes. Well, that's it for this deep dive. Big thanks to Charles Duhigg for his incredible insights, and an even bigger thanks to you, our listeners, for joining us on this journey. We'll catch you on the next one.